I need to start with a prayer. So I'm going to use what I use frequently to help me decide on what to do. So join me, won't you? God, would you grant me the serenity to accept those things I cannot change? And God, grant me the courage to change those things I can. And finally, God, grant me the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. I titled this little talk, A Cheerful and Generous Giver. Just to forewarn you, this is a guy in church talking about money. Like a politician talking about Social Security, that's one of those topics that most people really try to avoid. And I've even heard it called the third rail of religion. But it's scary, somebody's got to do it, that's me. I want to make it clear from the start that what I'm about ready to say are my opinions and my research. I speak for no one else. And even though it may not sound like it, I'm really not speaking to you individually. I'm speaking to us as a church. The only specific amount I know of anyone that gives to this church is mine, and what Carol and I do. And so I'm not asked to see any kind of records, and I never will. What you do and what you give to this church is your business. But I'm simply here today to share with you what Carol and I believe. She's not even here to be able to join us, but I know I speak for her because I've run this pastor. So I'd like to share with you what we do and why we do it. And if by some terribly bad luck, this is your first day at Trinity, we don't talk about this very often, you can go ahead and head down to Cava House. It's not too far away, about 5 minutes here, and I'll be done. Anyway, let me show you some information that I think is going to help frame what we're talking about. Oh. What's happened here, most recently, is that we had a deficit budget last year. We had an end-of-year appeal, did very well, but not quite well enough. And so we're carrying a deficit into 2015, about $11,000. We've also, I thought I could see this from here, but I guess I can't. We've also had some reasonable but expected cost increases with health insurance and additional payroll taxes and ministry shares and what have you. And what you don't know is that we're going to be losing some of the antenna income that we've had for several years. That, coupled with the fact that we have fewer givers that we've had before, in fact we have 14 less, even though we've been adding some members, a number of people have passed away, some others have moved on. And so we have fewer people that are able to contribute to the situation. So the budget committee, we formed a budget committee, we talked about it, we made some recommendations. We've taken that to SBRC, and we've taken it to the church council as recently as this Tuesday. So each of these groups has agreed that we have to do one or two of both things. We either need to decrease some costs or increase giving. So let's talk about increasing giving, because decreasing costs is fairly evident. What would it mean to give to the church in the way that I'm going to suggest here in a moment? A couple ways we can look. We can look at the Bible, and it says, in the Old Testament, it talks about the tithe. The tithe is 1/10 of the income. And many of us have adopted that for the Christian church. The New Testament actually takes it beyond that. It says we should be a cheerful and generous giver. That we should actually not give under compulsion, but because we freely and generously want to. In Mark, it says to give out of our abundance. In a moment, I'm going to be talking about that abundance and what we actually have to give. And then finally, for those who still don't understand, Jesus said, you know what? Why don't you just sell all you've got and give it to the poor? Well, tithing doesn't seem too bad in that regard, does it? So. I looked at some census data about what we are here in the United States, what we are right here in Grand Rapids. And in fact, household incomes, we're pretty affluent in this area, right? We're actually, for the most part, if you look around, most of us fall into this category of we're white, we live in an urban area, we are mostly college educated, and that our household incomes are approaching $90,000. Now, that's not the case for all of us, I know that. I'm just looking at statistics and what they say here. Which means that, in fact, as it relates to the world, we're pretty far up the feeding chain, if you will, when it relates to income. We're about 97% population of what we can give and what people are able to give. That's many, many times the median of the world. If we get back to what we're doing here in Trinity, the last several years, we've had the numbers drop. And so we're down to the point where we're actually giving about $2,700 on average per giving unit. But in fact, we have averages. And so some people are giving much more. And on general, the most common amount that somebody gives here is $25 a week, which works out to be about $1,300 a year. $1,300 a year works out to be maybe 1.4, 1.5, 1.7% of their income. I think we can do better. I think you'd agree with me. Let's compare that to some things that we do spend money on. What about our cable bill? Did you know that the average cable bill here in Grand Rapids is about $1,700 bucks? That's more than many of us give to the church. What about that almighty cell phone and the data plans that we have? Family of 4, more often than not, we're giving about $2,200 a year for that sort of thing. So the situation is this, and it's important. Our budget right now, our pledges are about $460,000, $463,000. We need about $80,000 more, which is a substantial amount. Now, we can't do that by simply cutting programming. If we cut all the programming, all the money we spent on youth, and all the money we spent on missions and everything else, we would still fall $20,000 short. We will have to reduce some staff. And it's going to affect every single ministry that we have here. It's going to affect community ministries, it's going to affect music, children, youth, facilities. So we need to increase the amount that we're giving if we're going to try to avoid budget cuts. I'm going to suggest that we start thinking about tithing as opposed to thinking of meeting for a budget. That we actually think about increasing the percentage of our giving. And I'm going to challenge each of you in a moment to think about moving up a couple percentage points into how you give money to the church. In a moment, we're going to talk about opening up the stewardship campaign again so that we can decide as a congregation whether we want these budget changes to happen. We have an opportunity to change that, and you're going to get a chance to do that. But I think that we need to understand that compared with most Christian churches and most UMC churches, this is a pretty affluent church. And based on the wealth and disposable income that we have, we give a fairly tiny percentage of our income to the church. And particularly tiny compared to a tithe, particularly tiny compared to what Jesus is suggesting, that we give cheerfully and abundantly. The recent fiscal problems that we have here are not unique. This is chronic. But no worries. I've got a solution. It's unambiguous, and I've got a simple recommendation. We stop. We just stop living from budget to budget. Let's stop moving from one fiscal crisis to the next. Let's stop moving from one stewardship campaign to the next. Let's stop drumming up incredibly strong justifications as to why we should give some more to the church. Let's change our attitude away from giving to a budget to that towards giving, being a generous giver with a tithing attitude. I also suggest that we stop trying to compare ourselves to others. That if you're giving $40 a week to the church, that you don't feel good about yourself that I'm 50% more than what the rest of the churches do. I think what you should be asking yourself is, am I tithing or am I not? Now, I've got a strong guess as to what you're thinking right now because I used to think the same thing. Tithing? Are you nuts? I can't afford tithing. That's for Jesus freaks, Bible thumpers. That might have been okay for the Israelites, but hey, this is 2015. I've got bills to pay. I'll give what I can to help Trinity, and if they need some help, well, they'll tell me. And if they're doing something really good, well, maybe I'll throw a little bit extra in, but, for the most part, here's my 25 bucks a week. Well, that's the attitude I used to have. That's the attitude Carol and I had until, after many private and, frankly, soul-searching conversations, we decided to take some steps to change it. I think you can do the same. In fact, I know you could if you wanted to. And you can start today. So there's a lot of information I've just given you here. So let me try to summarize it to the simple vision that I hope that you'll walk away from. We're experiencing a fiscal shortfall. The Bible says we're supposed to give with a grateful heart, that we should give generously and cheerfully. The only quantifiable recommendations I could find in the Bible are in the Old Testament. It talks about a tithe. My studies also say that the New Testament, and Jesus says, can't just follow the letter of the law of what Moses laid down. It isn't enough the way we live our lives. nor in the way we give ourselves. We can't just do what it says. We should probably do that or more. Because it's not only good for others, it's good for us. It's good for our relationship with God. Be a cheerful and generous giver, and I believe you'll find yourself ultimately closer to God. I know that's what happened to me. I think it can happen to you too. I think few people would agree that our congregation in giving 1.7 or 1.4% is a cheerful and generous giver. But if you believe you're a cheerful and generous giver, who am I to tell you otherwise? I'm just saying if you don't feel cheerful about your gift, maybe it isn't because you're giving too much. Maybe it's because you're not giving enough. I love those paradoxes. If what I've shared with you today makes you willing to move towards tithing, that'd be a great time. This would be a great time to start. You probably can't go from 1.4 to 10% immediately, but couldn't you take a strong step in that direction? Why not set a path? Maybe increase 2% over the next 5 years. Maybe you could do it in the next 3 years. So starting today, I'd like you to reconsider your attitude on giving to the church. I'd like you to think in terms of tithing and not in terms of meeting the budget. Think in terms of giving out of our abundance, not in terms of cost containment and financial obligation. In the pews, we'll be passing out the same pledge cards you saw a few months ago. If you're in a good place with your giving, no need to do anything, just pass it out. No one's going to come back and try to contact you and see if you upped your pledge. However, if you do turn it in, we'll be able to address some of our budget shortfall. Over the next 2 weeks, we'll collect these new pledge cards and then determine if we need to make the cuts I spoke about to the ministries and to the staffing of this church to reconcile our expenses to our gifts. This isn't a threat, it's a simple reality. I think this is a great church. I bet you do too. I know we do some really great things in this community. I think we can do even more. I'm proud to be a part of Trinity. I'm proud that our tithe goes to help further the issues of peace, love, and social justice. It's an important part of our faith. I hope you'll reconsider how you give and move along the path to tithing to fulfill the goal Jesus set out for us, to be a cheerful and generous giver.